backcountry Colorado, hiking, backpacking.
I did a lot of marathons. I was convinced to do some ultras.
Climbing, and I do filming and photography.
I just like the ultras because I love the community. I just think that everybody is so nice, whether they're the first place finishers or, you know, us that kind of mosey along.
Rare Air Talks happening tonight at Studio Boulder. There are 2 featured speakers on hand and a couple of special guests to introduce you to. If you're on your way to the event tonight, welcome. You're going to have a great time. But first, Kelly, my co-host, hello.
Hey, Russ.
How are you?
I'm good. It's beautiful out today.
It's going to be an awesome day. I can already tell. We don't normally do the Studio Boulder in the morning time.
No, it's interesting to be here so early. I'm not that much of a morning person, but here we are.
Here we are. And speaking of Studio Boulder, we've got Bill with us. Bill Goodrich, tell us your affiliation with the space here.
So I'm co-founder of the Studio Boulder. We've been around since 2014. Co-working space and event venue here in Boulder, Colorado. And
our host for tonight for Rare Air Talks, thank you so much for hosting.
Happy to have you guys. We're glad to have Dispatch Radio as a friend of the studio, and we're really excited for this first live event here.
And for folks that don't know, Studio Boulder, Luis Benitez from the governor's office, we have you on hand. Can you explain just visually what we're looking at here?
I'm still trying to get my head around where we're all sitting right now in a dazzlingly styled out Airstream trailer parked inside of a building, and I would say it's a cross between 1950s deco and I'm not quite. Is this a futon we're sitting on? What am I sitting on?
I'm not. Is it? Yeah, it's like a sectional futon.
It's a knockoff Ligny Rosé couch.
Ah, well, in that case, I'm much more comfortable now. Thank you. Yeah, it's incredible. This is a really unique space.
So it's a beautiful space. This is a co-working space. So folks upstairs work. So folks like Eric Jordy Henderson, Hendy is a PR guy in the outdoor industry. He works upstairs. Just a fun place for folks who are kind of independent, creative minds, artists. What types of folks work here?
Yeah, that's right. So we when we opened the space, we wanted to try to make it as sort of broad and diverse as possible in terms of people, what they do and what they're up to on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of places, co-working spaces are kind of geared towards one focus or one industry, and so we thought let's have something that is pretty broad, and it's been awesome. It's opened up a lot of great opportunities for people to collaborate that would never collaborate. We have like investment advisors that are being inspired by artists that work in the space, and all kinds of weird kind of inspirations like that are pretty exciting to see.
And you also host events, so we'll be hosting our Rare Air Talks tonight. Doors open at 6. Program 6:30 to 7:30 with after party at Upslope. We're super excited. Bill, thank you guys so much for hosting. We look forward to having a special evening. And now we're going to jump into what we're doing today, which is setting up, getting you introduced to a couple of our featured speakers. First off, Luis Benitez with the governor's office. We've had you on the show. We hung out with you at OR. Our viewers may be already familiar with you a little bit. You're kind of a big deal in this industry these days. You're working with 7 other states, unless that's been updated. 7 other?
No, 7 other states. Yeah.
7 other states to create outdoor industry actual offices within governor's offices or within the state system. And why is that? Why is that important?
Well, I think all these questions that we're asking ourselves, including what we're going to talk about tonight, it's not just happening in Colorado. Our industry is national. It's a multi-billion-dollar economy, and other states are starting to wake up to the fact that this is how we define our quality of life and our culture and our community. And if that's the case, why shouldn't we all be talking? And so I think that's the impetus behind other states creating this rule.
And sitting next to you, our other featured speaker for tonight, Jamie Logan. Welcome to the Airstream.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Last time I saw you, we were both at Movement, getting sweaty, doing some climbing. You've cleaned up. Yeah.
We showered before we came.
We all showered. We're all going to leave sweaty because the Airstream is hot. Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm 71 years old. I've been climbing for 60 years. I still love it, and I guess the most notable thing at this point is that I decided to transition about 6 or 8 years ago from male to female. And so I now basically live as a female person or somewhere in between, really.
And you will be sitting with the person next to you on stage tonight, Chris Weidner, a journalist here in Boulder, outdoors journalist, sharing your story. Thank you for coming out. It's a powerful story. Chris, welcome to the Airstream.
Thank you so much, Russ.
Tell us, we know, a lot of us know you a little bit by reputation and by byline. Tell us about Chris the person.
Well, I guess I'm here in Boulder because I'm a climber. I grew up in Seattle and moved here in 2001, which is when I met Jamie. And I've just been a climber ever since, working jobs that kind of allowed me the freedom to keep climbing. And turns out journalism is one of those.
And Kelly, doesn't that sound like a very typical Dispatch Radio guest?
Yes, people like you are here all the time, so we'd love to have you back for another podcast.
Well, what I mean is people that decide, you know what, this is what I'm passionate about. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to do this thing, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much everyone who comes on the show and most people who live in Boulder.
Right. And speaking of Boulder and getting introduced to Boulder, Elyse Rylander, because we talked about that earlier. Anyway, that's an aside. Welcome to the Airstream. Welcome to Boulder.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We've got you in town from Washington. Mm-hmm. You started an organization called Out There Adventures. You're really getting ahead of steam. We've seen you in Outside Magazine. We see that organizations like the North Face are sponsoring you. Outward Bound, I think you're working with. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Out There Adventures.
Yeah, so we're headed into our 4th season of programming. The nonprofit has been around for 5 years. The idea has been around for something like 7 or 8. And we are actually in the process of changing our mission statement. So we have been previously focused on getting LGBTQ young folks outside who are 14 through 22. And we've expanded that mission to include adults. So now, as we're reworking that mission statement, I say that we act as a conduit between the LGBTQ community and the outdoors through a number of different avenues. So we do day trips, multi-day expeditions, and then partner programs with organizations like Outward Bound, Northwest Youth Corps, Nature Bridge, a couple other folks that are moving and shaking in that side of the world and doing great things. And then I also organize a conference, an annual conference called the LGBTQ Outdoor Summit. We had the inaugural event in Seattle this last year with about 140 folks over 2 days. And this year we're doing it again for 3 days down in San Francisco. So we'd love for everyone to come out. You do not have to be a member of the LGBTQ community to come to that event. It's open to allies. And rather, we just require that folks have an interest in promoting the equity for that community in outdoor spaces.
And Jamie, what do you think? Are you familiar? Are you two familiar, first of all, with each other? And what do you think about all this?
No, this is the first time we've met, so this is very exciting.
I did not know about her until you told me, and I looked you up, and it looks like you're doing really great work.
So this is an interesting time in the outdoor industry, which is why we picked diversity and inclusion as our topic for the debut of Rare Air Talks. And what we want to do right now is just kind of set the table on just some of the issues. So, Jamie, maybe starting with you, can you just set the table if folks haven't been paying attention? There has been a shift, in our culture, in our country. People are able to live more freely, more comfortably with who they are because folks like you have been getting out and making that possible, right? Tell me about specifically when I say LGBTQ issues in the outdoor industry. What are we talking about?
I think from most LGBT people, the issue is feeling comfortable and feeling accepted and like they can openly be who they are. And so one example is that I've gone to several of the gay climbing conventions. There's actually Homo Climbtastic is a get-together of gay people in the New River Gorge. People come from all over the country. And the thing that I hear sort of universally is that they like being in a situation where they can totally openly be themselves and where couples can kiss and cuddle and do whatever in public and not feel like it's a problem. And so I just think the whole idea of being out and being accepted is something that's a moving target, and it's obviously moved tremendously in my lifetime. When I started climbing 60 years ago, all climbers were white males fundamentally, and so it's finally moving in a much better direction in terms of openness.
And one thing that comes up when we talk about transgender issues in particular are the terms. What's the right etiquette? What's the right language? For example, you're obviously she. You're choosing to be called she. That's how you represent. That's not necessarily what everybody does. That's going through some transition. There's a kind of a degree, a scale. That people, can you set the table a little bit on these topics just for folks that aren't informed at all, that just want a basic understanding of, hey, what is the right language, what is the right approach, how do I be respectful to somebody else, knowing that I'm kind of ignorant of what I might say that could be disrespectful?
Well, I would say that the first place to start is to ask people what their preferred pronoun is, which can be all over the place and also doesn't necessarily correspond to what you visually see. So there's a lot of people who live in the middle or somewhere else in the gender spectrum, and just the polite thing to do is just to ask, do you prefer he, she, they? And there's an infinite possibility of pronouns.
All right,
now.
well, let's practice. Can we practice, Kelly?
You go first.
All right, I'm going to practice. So I would say, hi, I'm Russ.
Hi, I'm Jamie.
And then do I go ahead and lead off and say, hey, and my preferred pronoun is he and him. My pronouns are he and him.
Could, although I would say that from what I see of you and know of you just even really quickly, that's pretty obvious.
There's not a question?
No, I don't think so.
That kind of bums me out a little bit.
I was wondering.
Did you pick up on a little? I have some feminine accents. Anyway. So continue.
So you could ask, so how people gender me depends in a large extent on how they approach me. So if a waiter approaches me from the back and sees my hair, I automatically get she. If I'm wearing a dress, I typically get she. But if someone approaches me and the first thing they interact with me is my voice, which is a more masculine voice, then they typically will start with he, and then sometimes when they actually look, then they change. But typically people don't change. Once they start with one gendering, it's something we do automatically all the time. We look at somebody and go he or she, sir or miss or whatever.
Jamie, sorry to interrupt, but do you correct people, or do you just go with it?
I just go with it. At first, in the beginning, when I was trying so hard to figure out who I was and what was going on, it was really upsetting to me. Mm-hmm. When I was at Whole Foods wearing a dress and the butcher said, "Can I help you, sir?" And then I realized that, well, the butcher can't see anything about my face and maybe only heard me say, "I want fish," and they're in a hurry and they don't really care. They're just trying to get through their day as fast as they can. So I finally learned not to be upset with it, and you have to have kind of a thick skin. And
so if I'm the butcher in that scenario,
yeah,
what should the butcher say? What would be helpful for the butcher should simply just ask?
Well, actually, if you're really in a service profession where you're dealing with a lot of people really fast, you probably don't want to ask. There's a million terms you can use that are non-gender specific, and those always work. A really good one is, "Can I help you, honey?" Or in the South, or dear, or
now I'm just going to interrupt real quick. Now,
Chris,
if the butcher said honey, isn't that offensive to some people though?
Right. Yeah, we're getting the butcher in trouble on another level there.
In the South, it's probably not actually, but anyway, there's none are really coming to mind. But there's lots of ways you don't actually need to say ma'am or sir or to function, and so the safe thing is just to not do it.
Let's get Elyse and Elyse in on this. Elyse, you talk to a lot of youth around these types of issues. From your perspective, just a layman, not all that familiar with this world, wants to understand this and help with this cause of being more acceptive and inclusive in the outdoors. Say I work at a big brand. I don't have any experience with this, but I'm hearing that this is an important issue. What would you tell me?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a number of things that you can do, and the truth is, we live in a very gendered world, right? And we all have unconscious bias, and it is a biological process that our brain engages in. And so, we don't like to ascribe shame or blame to folks that might make mistakes or make assumptions, but rather we ask folks to just take a minute to step back and think about, why do I code this person in this particular way? What assumptions am I making about this person? And then the next step is, what am I going to do if I'm presented with information that runs counter to what I assume to believe to be true, right? So in situations where since we work with a lot of youth, and I think there's a generational context to this as well, because things look very different for younger folks than they do for those of us that are even of millennial generations, Gen Xers and beyond, right? And so they are much more adaptable to this conversation of asking pronouns and not making those assumptions. And so for them, or when I'm engaging with youth, I'll say, hey, if I'm introducing myself to someone for the first time, my name's Elyse, I use she, her pronouns, blah, 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 right? And that is what I do when I am facilitating workshops and introducing myself to a larger group of people for the first time. I like to tell a story. Some of the work that I do is consulting work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and I tell a story of lots of people are like, when is it appropriate time to ask someone's pronouns? And I say there's never an inappropriate time to do so. When I was in my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin, there's the Hip Gay Club that came about in 2008.
Wait, did she just say Hip Gay Club in Madison,
This is
Wisconsin?
Madison, yeah. So there was another one that was a little bit seedier that was on the south side of Madison. The college kids didn't like to go to, but in 2008, this bar came into one of the cool neighborhoods. It was called Plan B, which I think is a terrible name for a gay bar, but regardless, it was the cool spot to be. So I was 18 or so at the time, and I'm on the dance floor, and this person that I had a class with at Wisconsin danced up to me. I think like Miley Cyrus Party in the USA was playing or something like that, and it's loud, and they dance up to me and they go, hey, we had the same class together, like blah blah blah, what are your preferred gendered pronouns? And I said, she, her. And they went, cool, thanks, and then just danced away. Right? So there is never an inappropriate time to ask that question.
Even with Miley Cyrus.
Even with Miley Cyrus blaring, it's dark.
Jamie, you're shaking your head yes on that.
Yeah, you can always ask, or you can not gender if you need to. I think maybe it depends on sort of the length of the interaction and what you're trying to accomplish.
It is an interesting question. Like, why do you feel the need? Like, why don't you just say they? Like my kid at daycare, the teachers just say they. They don't ever want to give you specifics on what kid bit your kid. So they just say they, and it's quite natural for them. So I guess that would be another option, would be, maybe you don't feel the need to gender somebody, right, Elyse?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we encourage folks to do, right? Or we get so accustomed to ascribing a gender to certain things that we see in the world, right? So like when I'm reading a med form for a student, if I see the letters Jane and read Jane, instinctively I'm making assumptions about how that person identifies, right? So in that moment, we want folks to pause and take a step back, right? And until you confirm the pronouns of that person and the gender identity, you should be using they, them, because the truth of the matter is you don't know, right?
And Luis, you deal a lot in the outdoor industry, which includes hook and bullets, a term I'm starting to use now because I like it when he says it. I think it
Rod
sounds
and gun,
cool.
hook and bullet. Yeah.
What was the first one?
Rod and gun club.
Rod and gun.
Yeah.
I don't like rod and gun. I don't know. It sounds yeah, you like it. It sounds hook and bullets. This has got to be a tough topic for some corners of that industry, particularly.
I think when we talk about our industry and our economy, this is the right time to be having all of these conversations. And I think if you look at diversity and inclusion holistically in our industry, we're having these conversations across multiple populations: the Latino community, the African American community, the Native American community. I think we're all starting to figure out that our landscape, to Jamie's point earlier, historically the outdoor industry has been pretty much white, pretty much male. But I don't think that's necessarily the case once you actually start to dig into our history a little bit. And so I think the evolution of how we talk about some of these things, how we engage in being a little bit more open and collective in our approach, I think that's what's shifting. I mean, I don't think, you hold up a gay hunter as a token hunter. I think they just love to be outside and go hunting or fishing or climbing or whatever it is. Outward Bound is an organization that came from the UK in World War II. Traditionally white, male, very sort of stuffy. But, now, and I think it's so fantastic that you're partnering with them. There's this evolution of thought, and it's happening across the board. And I think we are one of the few, to your question about the hook and bullet crowd being a little difficult with this, we're one of the few bipartisan economies in the country, which means that we represent every political stripe, every cultural nuance. And I think for the first time, we're starting to celebrate that and talk about that out loud.
Chris, you've known Jamie for quite a while, since you said 2002.
Yeah, 2001.
2001. Tell me about, first meeting Jamie and then now reconnecting with Jamie in this context, just, from the outsider's perspective. What have you witnessed?
Well, when I first met Jamie, she was Jim and a hero of mine. I mean, I had read about Jim's climbs from back in the 70s and 60s, and I was ecstatic to actually meet him then. And then just we've had, we've climbed in the gym before. We've had a bunch of interactions. We've talked a lot about history of climbing, I think, a number of times over the years. And yeah, when this transition happened, it's just, wow, well, that's interesting. And now Jim is Jamie. And actually, it's funny, one of the things, to go back to our earlier conversation, that I struggle with is if I'm talking about a climb you did in the 70s, I tend to say he. Is that what I should say, or should I say she? I don't know.
I think actually I've thought about this a bunch because I've been in some art magazine articles and things, and they were struggling with what to do. And I think I've come down on the side of that. In my heart of hearts, I was always she.
Oh, okay.
And even though it says in the book that Jim did this then, I think it's better for the reader or the people listening to just stay with a consistent she all the way back.
Sounds great.
That's my current thought on that.
Elyse, is that common, you think? Is that a fairly I do see the language, it almost seems like insignificant, but it is significant because language really does impacts our thoughts, and it's all connected. Is that fairly typical for transgender folks in particular? Most folks, when you're talking about the past, keep it consistent.
Oh, I think that's incredibly individualistic.
Okay.
And I think it's important to point out my positionality in this conversation as a cis woman, and speaking, on behalf of different identities and something. So that is not something that I can do from a lived experience perspective, but it's just entirely dependent on that
There's a whole
person.
spectrum.
Yeah, and I think that the key is to just continue to check in with folks, because it is an ever evolving process, right? It is not a one and done transition sort of thing, and so people might go through different evolutions, and we just need to, as allies for different folks, do our job, our due diligence in supporting and affirming that, right? And I'm glad that y'all brought this up, because I read an article about you, Jamie, and I think Climbing magazine or something like that from maybe a year or two ago, and I was really struck with the way that the writer was sort of fluid with your pronouns. And my question after reading that was, I wonder whose idea was that, and was that something that you had given them license to do, or was that just on the writer's behalf? Because that is something that we see happen.
And this, I think you're talking about the climbing piece by Julie Ellison, and
Heck yeah.
I think when Julie is writing about Jim, Logan, the pioneering rock climber, she's calling Jamie Jim and he, I think, if I'm recalling right.
And she made that decision. And I just want to clarify.
And now you're saying today it would be better if it was just consistent, if it was
I think that's less confusing to people.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of clarifications. One thing that Elyse just said is cis, which is an abbreviation for cisgendered, which is the term for humans that identify with the gender that they were given at birth, or that people assume they have. So, as in, she was originally called a female person, and she's happy with that, and she considers herself a female person. That's a cisgendered. So I'm just trying to clarify the word.
And the way she said it was, I am a cisgendered person.
She said cis.
You can say that. I think
or
that the
shorthand.
Cis. I'm a cis woman.
I'm a
right.
cis man. That means that I popped out. Doctor said,
said,
"Oh,
"You're
you've
a
got a
boy."
penis. You're a boy."
Right.
I say, "I'm good with that." So
Right.
that's cis. The opposite, the other option there would be transgender. You popped out. Doctor said you're this. No, that's not who I truly feel. Now that's transgender or trans.
Right.
Or agender, or there are a lot of people who are not at all comfortable with the binary system. There's a lot of people who live their life in the middle somewhere, and I think there's a completely full spectrum from super male to super female, and then you have everything in between. And there's people living their life in all those places and actually moving around, especially younger people are very comfortable in moving around in this. Today I'm going to wear a dress, tomorrow I'm not, whatever.
And to people of a certain generation, parents, that might have children that are going through this, that might think, what is this? I think you read it online. This isn't natural. This is, what do you even engage? Do you engage with those folks? The folks that, already seem kind of hardened in their positions, or not? I mean, I guess you're in Boulder, so how much are you running into that?
I've actually had a remarkable run of people being nice to me, and I think a lot of it is if you can feel good about yourself, which I actually do now, much more than I did before. If you can look at people in the face and smile and say hi, then you get an awful lot of mileage out of that. And I have talked to parents who have children, and I think with whether you want your kid to be a rock climber or not, or your kid wears dresses or whatever, my idea is you give them space. And I have a rock climbing friend whose son wore princess dresses from when he was 3 until he was 8. He wore them to the climbing gym to hang out with his dad. He wore them to school. He wore them all the time. And now he doesn't. And I don't think that means that he or she, that person, that young person is going to be trans or not trans or want to be a boy or a girl or whatever. I think we don't have any idea. And so they gave him space, and it turned out fine.
And Elyse, you work with a lot of youth. Do you talk to parents? If you did talk to parents, would you have advice? I know that's something, Kelly, that we've, in putting this program together, people have come out and said, hey, this is an issue that I care about. I'm connected to this issue. I have a friend or my daughter or my son, they're, whatever their situation is. We hear a lot of interest from parents in particular. Do you have advice for them if they've got maybe children that are experiencing this and don't really know where to go, don't know resources, and maybe the parents don't even know, how to best support them?
Sure. Well, and I think Jamie's point is right on. Just allowing the kids to lead that charge and give them that space for that exploration is key. And just affirming them in whatever it is that they want to explore, right? I think I'm not a parent, but I have been in that sort of position, being in outdoor education for the last 12+ years, in a number of ways, and being in charge of the lives of young folks. And so I think that is part of the job, is to just allow them to do what they want to do and explore in things that are going to be positive and healthy for them. And gender identity is one of those things. And the research shows that when parents are able to affirm their child's exploration of their gender identity from a very young age, all of those horrendous statistics that we see relating to the trans community around homelessness, addiction, abuse, suicide ideations, all sorts of those types of things that they experience at much, much higher rates than their cisgender peers, those things are alleviated, almost totally taken off the table, right? Because the kids are getting that affirmation.
With a support system in place?
Right,
Okay.
yes. When the parents say, okay, great, right? And we're not expecting parents to know instantaneously how to handle things, but there's so many wonderful resources out there. In Seattle alone, there's a group that meets every week, and they have it divided up by age groups, and we work every year. We happen to work with the teen group and their families, and we take them out to the ropes course for a day. And to be able to see those families working together and working with their child in this process is just fantastic. And they're not getting it right every single time. And sometimes as educators, instructors ourselves, we have to step in and coach parents on how to affirm their child's gender identity through small things like using the right pronouns. And we do that. But there are just so many fantastic resources if you just do, a little bit of research. And when you're in an urban area, those resources radically increase. And we're seeing that increase across the board. It's not just places like urban centers like Seattle.
Is there a couple of resources you could name that people could go online that are your favorites?
Yeah, there's an organization called the Trans Student Educational Resource, so TSER, and we send folks to their website all the time. They've got amazing infographics that are very aesthetically pleasing, very easy to digest. And then the other organization that we happen to be close with, because we're in close proximity, they're based out of Seattle, is Gender Odyssey. And they actually put on, I think it's the world's largest conference for trans folks. And so they put it on in Seattle and in LA every year. And then they have these different support groups that operate out of that overarching umbrella organization. And so those are great places to start. And then from there, you can take a deep dive into the rabbit hole that is the internet and find all sorts of different resources.
Or don't do that. We don't recommend. We've got Luis here. He's with the governor's office. He's a very busy guy. We told him we'd let him go. We want to do something really quick. If Jake is ready, we're just going to go. Are you ready for the little video thing? Yeah. And you'll just kind of get little close-ups for each. Yeah. All right, cool. Or just position it. Can.
What do you need us to do?
We're gonna have everybody just do something real quick. We're just gonna have you, when I say diversity and inclusion in the outdoors, I want you to tell me a word or a phrase that comes to mind just to kind of describe the current state of affairs, and then just tell me about your outlook for the future. What you see moving forward. Does that make sense? Does that question make sense? Are you good at answering this too? I know you're a fish out of water.
I'm working on it. We're working on it in my mind.
All right, good.
Now.
All right, well, you'll be last, so you can
perfect.
steal one of their answers. Elyse, do you want to go first?
Sure.
All right, guys. So this is just going to be a little video thing that we'll put out on Facebook as well. So we can look at the camera for this one. Yeah. Look awkwardly at the iPad. You can keep your mic. And the question is a word or phrase to describe the state of diversity and inclusion in our outdoor community. And then just tell us a little bit about what you see moving forward.
So my phrase of where I think we are right now is doing good work, but we have a heck of a long way to go. And I think intersectionality is going to be key in achieving that. And I think that what the industry needs to realize is that we need to not just continue to carve out space for folks to find their niche. I think those that have had privileged positions in the industry need to actively give up space in order to achieve the equity that we are actually trying to strive, because that space has been taken from a lot of these marginalized communities that Louise mentioned earlier. So that's where I think the industry needs to head, and that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks. But that is where we are because of the history that we have as an industry, and so I think that's where we need to go to achieve true equity.
Yeah, I think my word or phrase would be inclusivity versus exclusivity. To piggyback off of what you've said, our industry is kind of exclusive. We do unique things and can oftentimes be scary, but the community influence on that to create a little bit more space and to actually help people understand that this has always been here. It's always been a part of our community, but now we need to shine the light on it a little bit further to make sure that when we do talk about diversity and inclusion, it's not just token.
I think for me the word is improving, and just generally I have a sense of it's all getting better, and the young people are the real key. Probably the best sport climber in the country right now is a young man of color who's 19 years old that I've climbed on El Cap with a gay woman that can lead 513 on the 5th day off a hammock, 513 trad climbing, and it's all getting better. It's improving. That's my idea.
Yeah, Jamie, I'm going to echo that because I think positive evolution is my phrase. being a straight white guy, I've seen a lot of really positive change in the last 10 or 20 years in climbing. I mean, huge. From the broad perspective, you mentioned, Jamie, back in the 50s what it was like, but even in the 90s, being homosexual was really kind of out there in the climbing community, at least, mainly because we just weren't exposed to that. And now I just think it has come so far, and because of events like this, I think it's just rapidly getting much more comfortable for everybody.
For me, I feel a lot of acceptance and connection is what we really need to stay open to, and just connecting with people more, asking questions, and just accepting to women in general, just being really good at sports. You always hear that's a woman if someone's really good still. So to keep more of an open mind about that is what I was thinking about.
By the way, I just want to mention that Kelly placed top 10 at the Quad Rock this past weekend, won her age group. She is a beast out there on the trail, so we got to mention that. Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah.
She's an animal. I would say just getting started from my initial due diligence on the topic. I have a lot to learn, personally. I grew up in the South. I'm a Georgia boy. I'm learning. And I would say just getting started, that it feels like, similar to what Louisa said in the past on our program, the conversation is just starting. So that gives me great hope that we are going to be making leaps and bounds with incredible folks like you leading the charge. So thank you all so much. We will see you tonight at Rare Air Talks. Doors at 6, program at 6:30, after party at Upslope starting at 8 with the Good Kind Band. Woohoo. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Yay! Luis, yay! I hope that was like the most fun you're gonna have until 6:30 tonight.
I could literally take a nap.
Yeah, right.
Right now.
I know you guys want it.
All right. Does anybody need help out of this thing? That's always the question.
Where's the coach here? Working space? We should come back here early.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's upstairs. You're always welcome. Anybody? You want to lift? All right.
You gotta rotate.
All right. And Chris and Jamie, these will be the chairs that we're gonna put you in. Don't those look comfy? We're gonna be standing. We're gonna be. Yeah. Do you guys want to walk back? That's nice to finally meet.